Long before self-help books, therapists, relationship advice podcasts, or viral internet quotes existed, people struggled with the exact same emotional truth. Some hearts are trained to keep pouring, even when the cup is already empty. And to understand how deeply rooted this pattern is, we have to travel through time. Not in fiction, not in fantasy, but through real history, through centuries of relationships, silent sacrifices, unspoken pain, and the invisible weight carried mostly by the one who gives more. This is the story of love through generations, and the slow, painful realization humans have faced for centuries, that love was never meant to cost a person themselves. They never notice the moment it begins, because giving feels beautiful at first. It feels warm. It feels noble. It feels like the right way to love. You tell yourself that love means effort, patience, sacrifice, endurance. You tell yourself that strong people hold relationships together. You tell yourself that choosing someone means staying no matter how tired your soul feels. And slowly, without realizing, you begin to give pieces of yourself away, little by little, until you are no longer sure how much of you is left. This story begins from that moment, the quiet moment, the moment where a heart learns how to love more than it loves itself. It begins in an ordinary town in America, where ordinary people lived with extraordinary emotional burdens they never talked about. Because here, love had always been described as something heroic, something dramatic, something grand. Sacrifice wasn't considered pain, it was considered proof. Endurance wasn't exhaustion, it was loyalty. And the one who stayed, no matter how heavy it felt, was always seen as the strong one, the loving one, the good one. But nobody ever asked, what happens to that person? There was a woman who grew up being taught that kindness meant never saying no. She learned young that if she made herself smaller, if she stayed quiet, if she kept smiling even when she was breaking inside, people would love her. Every teacher praised her, every adult admired her, every friend expected her to be the understanding one. So when she grew up and entered a relationship, she didn't know how to ask for balance. She knew how to give. She knew how to fix. She knew how to hold a collapsing world together with shaking hands. But she did not know how to be held. The person she loved wasn't cruel. That's what made it harder. They weren't abusive. They weren't monsters. They simply didn't know how to give the same way she did. So slowly, without meaning to, they let her carry everything. The emotions, the apologies, the misunderstandings, the silent hurts. She would stay up at night thinking, maybe I just need to be more patient. She believed if she loved more, things would balance themselves. She believed love returned itself naturally if you poured enough of it out. But days turned into months, months turned into years, and the more she gave, the more invisible she felt. And her story was not unique. Across generations, across states, across decades of American history, there were always people like her, the givers, the fixers, the ones who forgave before apologies came, the ones who stayed awake while their partners slept peacefully through emotional storms, the ones who smiled in public and broke in private, the ones who carried the relationship on their shoulders quietly because they were terrified of dropping it. Their love didn't come from weakness, it came from strength. But strength can turn into self-destruction when nobody ever stops them and says, you deserve to receive too. There was a man who spent his whole life trying to be the dependable one. He was raised to believe that being needed meant being valuable. So in his relationship, he always showed up. He fixed every problem, paid for everything, solved every crisis, hid every frustration. Every time he was hurt, he told himself, it's okay, I can handle it, I'm strong. Every time he didn't feel appreciated, he swallowed it. Every time he wanted emotional intimacy but didn't get it, he convinced himself it was selfish to ask. Slowly, he became a support system instead of a partner. Slowly, he became a background character in his own love story, while someone else stood at center stage. He didn't realize it at first. None of them do. Because giving feels honorable, it feels righteous. Society praises the giver,
Movies romanticize sacrifice. Songs glorify staying no matter how painful it feels. And so givers don't notice the quiet way exhaustion lives inside their bones. They don't notice how they always apologize first, even when they didn't do anything wrong. They don't notice how they always bend, while the other person never learns how to meet them halfway. Until one day, their heart starts whispering. The whisper is soft at first. "I'm tired." But they ignore it. They keep giving. Then the whisper becomes a tremor. "I don't feel seen." But they tell themselves love requires patience. Then one day, it becomes a truth they cannot silence anymore. "I don't know who I am anymore." They realize they've spent so long loving someone else that they've forgotten how to love themselves. They've spent so long making someone else comfortable that they forgot what it feels like to be emotionally safe. They've spent so long proving they're worthy of love that they didn't notice how deeply they've been starving for it. Suddenly, they begin to see all the moments they ignored, the times they apologized first to keep peace, the times they convinced themselves their needs were too much, the times they settled for crumbs and called it love, the nights they cried quietly because they didn't want to cause drama, the days they walked on emotional eggshells trying not to upset the balance. They start to recognize the truth. Giving too much doesn't make a relationship stronger. It simply teaches the other person they don't have to try. And somewhere else in the world, there are countless souls just like them, walking around with tired hearts that have loved more than they ever received. They live in busy cities, small towns, old streets, and new neighborhoods. They laugh normally, talk normally, work normally, live normally. But deep down, they carry that quiet ache, that invisible fatigue, that fear that if they ever stop giving, they will lose everything. They misunderstand love. They think love means never leaving. They think love means always understanding. They think love means staying even when it hurts. But love was never supposed to demand your destruction. Love was meant to be shared, not drained. Love was meant to be mutual, not one-sided. Love was meant to feel like home, not a battlefield. And when someone finally reaches that breaking point, something powerful happens. They don't explode. They don't scream. They don't rage. They simply stop. They stop chasing, they stop begging, they stop shrinking themselves, they stop sacrificing who they are to keep someone else comfortable. They take a breath, they let go, not because they stopped loving the other person, but because they finally, painfully, beautifully learned to love themselves too. And in that moment, the story changes. The giver finally becomes the person who receives. The person who once held everything together now allows their soul to rest. They learn that it's okay to want emotional safety. It's okay to expect effort back. It's okay to choose peace over endless tolerance. Because love was never meant to hurt that much. Love was never meant to cost a person their own heart. Love was always meant to stay, not because someone begs it to, but because both people choose to honor it equally every single day. And this story, though told through different faces, different names, different times, different generations, remains the same lesson every era eventually learns. If you have to lose yourself to keep someone else, it was never love worth keeping.
They begin to notice it not in loud moments, but in the quiet ones, in the way laughter doesn't come as easily anymore, in the way their chest feels heavy even on peaceful days, in the way the world around them looks fine, life continues, responsibilities remain, conversations happen, smiles still appear on their face, but something feels lost inside. Something feels worn out. Something feels like it has been silently used for far too long. They start remembering who they used to be before they started giving more than they should. They remember the version of themselves that had dreams not tied to keeping someone else happy. The version that laughed without worrying whether someone would misunderstand. The version that didn't constantly check their words, didn't filter their feelings, didn't carefully hide hurt so they wouldn't seem too emotional. They remember a time when they weren't afraid to take up space in their own life.
Slowly, they begin to understand that love was never supposed to demand silence from them. Love was never supposed to ask them to erase themselves. Love was supposed to be a place where both hearts could breathe, where both souls could rest, where effort flowed naturally from both sides. Somewhere along the road, they stopped being a partner and became a caretaker, someone responsible for someone else's comfort at the cost of their own peace. They start to trace back moments they ignored, times when they brushed aside their disappointment because they didn't want to seem dramatic, times when they swallowed hurt because they didn't want to start an argument, times when they kept forgiving repeated patterns, telling themselves maybe the next time would be different, times when they accepted the bare minimum because at least it was something. Slowly, reality becomes clearer. This wasn't love balanced on two shoulders. This was love being carried on one. And as they begin to truly see this, something starts changing within them. It's not anger that grows. It's not hatred. It's not revenge. It's simply awareness. An awareness that their heart deserves to live, not just serve. That they deserve to feel supported, not endurance tested. That love should feel like partnership, not responsibility. And the person on the other side, the one receiving all the giving, sometimes they truly don't understand what they've been doing. Sometimes they have become so comfortable being loved so deeply that they forgot love requires participation, not just presence. They don't notice how many times the other person showed up without being asked. They don't notice how many emotional storms were handled quietly so they wouldn't have to feel uncomfortable. They don't notice how many times apologies were spoken just to keep peace instead of being deserved. They don't notice until the giving heart changes. Because the most powerful shift in any relationship isn't loud, it isn't dramatic, it isn't explosive. It is silent. It is when the heart that always tries finally stops trying, when the person who always apologizes stops apologizing, when the one who always reaches out doesn't anymore. And suddenly the balance that always leaned in one direction evens out for the first time, not because both are giving, but because the giver finally stopped carrying everything alone. The other person begins to feel the emptiness then. They begin to see the absence of effort that had always been hidden beneath someone else's strength. They begin to feel the emotional responsibility they never bothered to share. For the first time, they face the truth. The relationship didn't survive because both tried. It survived because one did too much. And the one who gave too much finally understands something deeper than heartbreak, deeper than sadness, deeper than disappointment. They understand themselves. They understand their worth. They understand that love is not proven by suffering. Love is not proven by how much pain you can endure. Love is not proven by how much of yourself you are willing to erase to keep someone from leaving. Real love doesn't ask that. Real love shows up. Real love respects. Real love reciprocates. Real love notices. And when they finally step back, when they finally breathe, when they finally choose themselves after a lifetime of choosing others first, they don't become cold. They don't become heartless. They don't give up on love. They simply learn to love differently. They learn to choose love that meets them halfway. Love that values their presence, love that doesn't take their effort as something guaranteed, love that gives back without being begged, love that allows them to feel safe speaking, safe needing, safe existing fully. They learn that they were never asking for too much. They were simply asking the wrong person. And slowly, peacefully, quietly, the giver becomes whole again.
They begin to rediscover themselves slowly, not in grand moments, but in simple ones, in quiet mornings where the air feels lighter, in evenings where silence is peaceful instead of painful, in conversations where they no longer fear saying what they truly feel, in laughter that no longer has to hide sadness beneath it.
They start to do things they once stopped doing for the sake of the relationship. They revisit hobbies they abandoned. They reconnect with friends they drifted from. They remember dreams they pushed aside. And for the first time in a very long time, their life feels like it belongs to them again. There is still pain, yes. Healing is never instant. There are memories that ache. There are moments the past returns unexpectedly. There are nights where the mind replays everything, questioning whether things could have turned out differently. Healing doesn't erase history. It teaches you how to carry it without breaking under its weight. But alongside the pain, something new grows. A quiet strength, a deeper self-respect, a softness toward themselves they never had before. They begin to understand that loving deeply is not a weakness. Caring fully is not a flaw. Being someone who gives is not something to be ashamed of. Their kindness was never the problem. The problem was believing that love only worked if they carried it all alone. They finally see that a heart like theirs deserves to be matched, not used. And life has a strange way of moving forward. The person who once depended on their endless giving eventually feels the emptiness left behind. Not immediately, not dramatically, slowly. They begin to realize that what they lost was not someone who needed them, but someone who nurtured them, someone who stood by them, someone who loved them with a rare purity, someone who offered a kind of loyalty most people never find twice in a lifetime. They remember the comfort. They remember the effort. They remember the safety. They remember the love that always showed up. Regret doesn't always come with tears. Sometimes it comes with quiet realizations in empty rooms. Sometimes it comes with the sudden weight of understanding what they took for granted. Sometimes it comes when they finally meet the responsibility of effort and realize they never learned how. But by then, the giver has grown. They have healed into someone who will never again beg for reciprocation, someone who will never again shrink themselves to fit inside someone else's comfort zone, someone who has learned that love without balance is not love. It is emotional labor disguised as devotion. Eventually, when they do find love again, it will be different. There will be partnership instead of exhaustion. There will be communication instead of guessing. There will be effort instead of excuses. There will be peace instead of constant emotional survival. And when that love comes, they recognize it instantly, not because it overwhelms them with intensity, but because it feels calm, it feels natural, it feels steady, it feels like home. They no longer need to prove their worth. They no longer need to earn affection. They no longer need to give until they disappear. They simply exist, and love meets them there. And that is the quiet miracle of choosing yourself. Not bitterness, not hardness, not walls around your heart. Just balance, just clarity, just love that doesn't drown you, but fills you gently.
They begin to see life differently. Not as something they are constantly trying to hold together, but as something that can hold them too. They realize how many years they lived in emotional survival mode, always cautious, always careful, always adjusting themselves so no one would get upset, always ready to apologize, always ready to fix things they didn't break. Now they understand something powerful. They were never too much. They were simply someone who cared deeply in a world that often takes deep hearts for granted. Slowly, they begin to forgive themselves for staying too long, because staying wasn't foolishness, it was hope. Staying meant they believed in love. Staying meant they wanted to build something real. Staying meant they valued connection enough to fight for it. There is no shame in trying. The real tragedy would have been never loving at all. And even though their heart once broke from giving too much, they now carry wisdom inside it instead of wounds. They learn to set boundaries. They learn to say no without feeling guilty. They learn that peace is not selfish. They learn that walking away is sometimes the bravest kind of love, the love you give yourself. They also begin to understand something about the world. People who give too much often grew up believing they had to earn love. Somewhere in their past, they learned that being easy, being quiet, being helpful, being endlessly patient, being endlessly forgiving is how you keep love from leaving. And so they repeat the pattern again and again until life finally teaches them to stop. Healing breaks that cycle. Healing teaches them that love is not a reward, love is not a prize, love is not something you must perform for. Love is something that is shared, equally, gently, willingly. And as time passes, they stop romanticizing people who made them feel small. They stop glorifying relationships that demanded emotional sacrifice. They stop missing situations that nearly destroyed their spirit. They look back, not with longing, but with understanding. The past becomes a teacher, not a prison. They begin to admire themselves for surviving, for staying gentle despite the hurt, for learning without becoming bitter, for choosing growth instead of resentment. One day, they meet someone who doesn't love them because of how much they give, but because of who they are. Someone who doesn't expect emotional labor as proof of loyalty. Someone who doesn't drain them, but pours into them. Someone who knows how to say, "I'm here too. I'll carry this with you." And it feels unfamiliar at first. Being cared for, being listened to, being considered, being prioritized. They almost don't know how to receive it, because for so long they were the giver, the healer, the supporter, the strong one. But eventually they learn that it's okay to lean, it's okay to rest, it's okay to be human. The world looks softer then. Their story becomes brighter, not because everything is perfect, but because they finally stepped out of a life where love meant losing themselves. Now, love means companionship, trust, presence, balance. They discover that the greatest transformation is not when someone else finally changes, it's when you do. When you finally choose yourself, when you finally respect your heart, when you finally protect your peace. They no longer ask, "How much more can I give?" Now they ask, "Does this love honor who I am too?" And that question changes everything. They walk forward now with a steady heart, strong but not hardened, wise but still soft, scarred but beautifully healed. Their journey from overgiving to self-respecting is not a story of heartbreak. It is a story of rebirth. They begin to live again, not as someone constantly proving their worth, but as someone who finally understands it. Days feel lighter. Nights are calmer. Their heart no longer beats with the fear of losing someone. Instead, it beats with the quiet confidence of someone who knows they will never lose themselves again. They stop begging for reassurance. They stop waiting for bare minimum affection. They stop settling for almost love. And something beautiful happens. They learn to enjoy their own company. They start going on walks without carrying emotional weight. They sit in silence, and the silence doesn't hurt anymore. They laugh not because they're pretending to be okay, but because they truly feel joy returning to their life. They start building futures not around someone else's comfort, but around their own happiness. The world doesn't seem threatening anymore. Relationships don't feel like heavy tests. Love doesn't feel like a battlefield. They have finally learned balance. They see relationships differently now. Instead of asking, "How can I make them stay?" they ask, "Does this person bring peace into my life?" Instead of asking, "What more can I do?" they ask, "What are they doing too?" Instead of shrinking themselves, they show up fully and expect to be met fully. If someone tries to take advantage of their kindness again, they notice it faster. The red flags that once looked like flowers now look exactly like what they are. They don't romanticize emotional distance anymore. They don't chase unavailable hearts. They don't mistake pain for passion anymore.
They choose differently. They choose people who communicate. They choose people who show up. They choose people who take responsibility. They choose people who don't watch them drown in effort while staying comfortably on shore. And little by little, love becomes simple again. Not dramatic, not confusing, not exhausting, just warm, just steady, just real. They finally understand one of the greatest truths of life. Loving deeply is a gift. Giving is beautiful. Caring is powerful. But love is only healthy when the giving flows both ways. They will always be a giver. That is their nature. Their heart will always be soft. They will always care intensely. But now their love has wisdom. Now their kindness has boundaries. Now their compassion has self-respect standing beside it. They no longer break themselves to keep love alive. They no longer bleed to prove they care. They no longer disappear inside someone else's comfort. They stand tall. And when they look back, they no longer see a story of being used. They see a story of growth, a story of transformation, a story of someone who had every reason to harden, but chose to heal instead. They bless the version of themselves who tried. They thank the version of themselves who survived, and they honor the version of themselves they have become. This is not the end of their story. This is the beginning of a healthier one. They begin to move through life with a quiet grace that only people who have been shattered and rebuilt can understand. They don't rush anymore. They don't chase anymore. They don't desperately hold on anymore. They allow life to unfold. They allow love to reveal itself naturally. They allow relationships to be chosen instead of forced. There is a softness in their voice now, but it is not weakness. It is strength shaped by pain, wisdom shaped by experience, courage shaped by heartbreak. They have learned to stay open without allowing themselves to be drained. They have learned to care deeply without losing themselves in the process. They have learned that love should be shared, not survived. And the world notices the change. Friends see someone calmer. Family sees someone stronger. Life itself responds differently to someone who is no longer terrified of being alone. Because they now know loneliness isn't the absence of someone else. Loneliness is the absence of yourself. And they are no longer missing from their own life. They walk differently. They speak differently. They choose differently. They no longer mistake familiarity for love. They no longer mistake chaos for passion. They no longer mistake emotional hunger for emotional connection. They look at their past with compassion, not regret. They understand that the version of themselves who gave too much wasn't foolish. They were loving. They were hopeful. They believed in people. And that is not something to be ashamed of. That is something to honor. But love without balance is no longer welcome in their life. They will still give because giving is part of who they are. They will still love deeply because depth is part of their soul. They will still care sincerely because sincerity is their nature. But now their love is wiser. Their heart is protected. Their spirit has boundaries. And one day, standing in a moment of peace they once thought they'd never find, they realized something extraordinary. They did not lose in love. They did not fail in love. They evolved through love. Their story is no longer about breaking. It is about becoming. Becoming someone who knows their worth. Becoming someone who honors their heart. Becoming someone who will never again disappear inside someone else's needs. They finally understand the most powerful love story they will ever live is the one they build with themselves. And that love, it doesn't drain, it doesn't demand, it doesn't destroy. It restores, it nourishes, it stays.
They begin to understand that healing isn't a sudden sunrise, it's a slow dawn. Light doesn't crash in all at once. It slips in quietly. It warms gently. It touches the parts of the heart that were once numb, and life slowly breathes into places that were once frozen. They notice this in the way they forgive themselves sooner now. They no longer carry guilt like armor. They no longer replay every mistake until their mind feels bruised. They no longer blame themselves for loving too deeply. Instead, they honor that part of them, because loving deeply was never a flaw. It was a beautiful strength that simply didn't belong in the wrong hands. They begin to live life with intention now. They choose where their energy goes. They choose who deserves their emotional presence. They choose relationships that nourish instead of consume. Sometimes the world still tests them. Sometimes someone comes along who reminds them of their past, someone who expects them to overextend again, someone who tries to benefit from their kindness without respecting their heart. And for a brief second, the old pattern tries to wake up inside them, the reflex to give too much, to bend, to stay silent, to endure. But this time, they pause. They remember. They remember the nights of quiet heartbreak. They remember the exhaustion of loving alone. They remember the emptiness of giving endlessly. And with calm strength, they choose differently. They say no with dignity instead of fear. They walk away without trembling. They let go without collapsing. This is what growth looks like, not becoming harder, but becoming clearer. They now understand that people who take advantage of big hearts do so because they never learned how to love properly. They now see that not everyone deserves access to their softness. Not everyone deserves the parts of them built from loyalty, patience, and devotion. Those parts are precious now. Those parts are protected. And for the first time in a long time, love no longer feels like a battlefield inside them. It feels like something peaceful, something gentle, something safe. They start to notice how many forms love actually exists in, beyond romantic relationships. Love in friendships that check in, love in family who supports silently, love in their own determination to keep growing, love in simple everyday moments like laughter, calm mornings, music, sunsets, quiet nights, deep breaths. Their heart learns that fullness doesn't come from being needed, it comes from being valued. And eventually, one day, without forcing it, without chasing it, without bending themselves into painful shapes to make it happen, love finds them again. But this love is different. This love listens. This love shows effort. This love meets them halfway. This love brings comfort, not confusion. They don't have to guess how this love feels. They don't have to beg it to stay. They don't have to sacrifice their spirit to deserve it. This love isn't loud, dramatic, or exhausting. It feels like sitting beside a warm fire on a cold night. It feels like steady hands holding theirs. It feels like being chosen simply because they exist. And when that love arrives, they don't lose themselves inside it. They stand beside it, whole, balanced, alive. For the first time, love is not something they chase. It is something that walks beside them.
They begin to understand something profound about love, life, and themselves, something they could never have learned without going through everything they went through. They realize that growth doesn't erase the past, it transforms it. The memories don't disappear, but their meaning changes. What once felt like heartbreak now feels like a powerful lesson. What once felt like failure now feels like evolution. What once felt like loss now feels like liberation. They stop seeing their old self as weak. They stop blaming themselves for staying too long. They stop criticizing the version of them that didn't know better yet. Instead, they feel gratitude. Gratitude for the heart that never stopped believing in love. Gratitude for the strength that carried them through silent storms. Gratitude for the resilience that rebuilt them when they felt broken beyond repair. And they begin to realize something else, too. Life was never punishing them. Life was preparing them to understand themselves, preparing them to recognize real love, preparing them to walk into the future with a healed, aware, and grounded heart. They now carry wisdom that can't be taught in books or lectures. It can only be earned by living. They know now that love without effort is not love. Love without respect is not love. Love without balance is not love. They understand that the right relationship will never ask them to trade their identity for connection. It will never demand that they shrink, silence, or sacrifice everything that makes them who they are. The right love doesn't arrive with fear tied to it. It arrives with steadiness, with mutual effort, with genuine presence. The person they are now loves more softly, but more truthfully. They don't exaggerate love to prove loyalty. They don't overgive to avoid abandonment. They don't confuse emotional exhaustion with emotional depth. They love honestly. They love consciously. They love with boundaries. And because of that, they finally attract a different world around them, different relationships, different friendships, different energy. They no longer resonate with chaos. They no longer resonate with manipulation. They no longer resonate with the kind of love that leaves them empty. They finally outgrew it. They step into a new chapter of life where love is no longer survival. It is connection. It is warmth. It is reciprocity. It is peace. Their story no longer sounds like, "I gave everything and lost myself." Now it sounds like, "I learned, I healed, and I found myself again." They have become someone stronger than they ever imagined, but also softer in the most beautiful way. They haven't hardened, they haven't closed their heart, they haven't turned cold. They simply became wiser about where their heart belongs. And in that wisdom, they find a new kind of freedom, a freedom where they can love deeply without fear, where they can care fully without losing themselves, where they can stand beside someone without disappearing beneath them. This story, this healing, this transformation is still continuing toward its long, full completion.
They begin to understand that life has seasons, and some seasons exist only to teach us how to bloom again after we've been cut down. They realize now that there was a time they lived with a constant ache inside their chest, a quiet fear wrapped inside every heartbeat, an unspoken worry that if they ever stopped being the strong one, everything would fall apart. Now they see how heavy that burden truly was. They see how many moments they spent holding their breath, how many days they lived on emotional autopilot, how many nights they whispered, "It will get better," even when it never did. But that weight is gone now. Where once there was tension, there is calm. Where once there was doubt, there is clarity. Where once there was desperation, there is peace. And with that peace comes acceptance. Acceptance that not every love story is meant to last forever. Acceptance that not every person we love knows how to love us back. Acceptance that sometimes the bravest thing we can ever do is walk away from what we once begged to stay. They no longer judge love by how hard they had to fight for it. They no longer measure love by sacrifice. They no longer glorify pain as proof of commitment. Now they look for different things. They look for emotional safety. They look for consistency. They look for tenderness. They look for partnership. They want conversations, not confusion. Healing, not hurting. Presence, not promises. And in this new understanding of love, they redefine strength. Strength is no longer silently enduring. Strength is saying, "This hurts, and I deserve better." Strength is no longer waiting endlessly. Strength is choosing peace. Strength is not clinging. Strength is knowing when to release. They learn that the heart does not break to punish us. It breaks to wake us, to shake us out of illusions, to force us into growth, to push us back toward ourselves. They see now that heartbreak didn't destroy them. It reshaped them. It deepened them. It refined them. It gave them a new type of sight, one that sees love for what it truly is, not what they desperately wish it to be.
They now have compassion for their past self. They now have loyalty to their present self. They now have hope for their future self. One day, standing in a moment that feels beautifully ordinary, maybe sitting by a window, maybe walking in a quiet street, maybe laughing with someone they trust, they suddenly realize something. They're happy. Not loudly, not dramatically, not performatively, just quietly, genuinely, deeply happy. Not because life is perfect, not because love became a fairy tale, but because they finally belong to themselves again. They finally understand that the greatest love story isn't the one they once begged for. It is the one they now live with themselves. A story where they are no longer the one who gives until empty, but the one who lives full. Their heart is no longer a battlefield. It is a home, a safe, steady, breathing place. And from that place, they are finally ready for whatever life brings next.
They begin to understand that their journey was never about losing someone else. It was about finding themselves. What once felt like a painful ending now feels like a powerful beginning. What once felt like breaking now feels like becoming. They look back now, and the story no longer hurts the same way. It doesn't burn, it doesn't sting, it doesn't ache. It simply exists as a past chapter that shaped them into someone wiser, stronger, freer. They realize that love was never supposed to demand constant sacrifice. It was never meant to drain. It was never meant to ask them to disappear so someone else could shine. Love was always meant to be shared between two hearts, not carried alone by one. They see now how important it is to know when to stop giving everything. They see how important it is to know when love becomes self-betrayal. They see how important it is to walk away when staying means losing themselves. And because of this understanding, they move forward with quiet dignity. They no longer rush into love. They no longer confuse intensity with connection. They no longer chase emotionally unavailable hearts. They no longer try to fix people who refuse to heal themselves. They choose peace over chaos, self-respect over desperation, truth over illusion. They still believe in love, but now they believe in love that shows up, love that participates, love that gives back, love that doesn't cost them themselves. And this is where their journey settles, not in heartbreak, not in regret, but in wisdom, self-love, and a future where they will never again give so much that they disappear. They finally learned the lesson life spent so long trying to teach. You were never too much. You were simply giving everything to someone who was giving you very little. Now you know better. Now you love better. Now you live better. And that changes everything.